to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. Very lucky to have Sean Ford here with us today, Head of Strategy at TRAXOne, a data advertising company. We'll get into that. Sean actually has a very rich experience background in equity research, dating back to Bloomberg, studying media and advertising organizations. I've had the privilege of knowing Sean for the past 3 years or so. I could tell you he's an excellent sailor, not a bad golfer, and one of my favorite people to have on a strategic partnership call. So Sean, thanks for being with us here today.
Awesome, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And, I touched on your background a little bit there, but you want to hop into your history? Tell us a bit about your path to get here today.
For sure. Yeah. So it's been a long, windy path, but it's been fun every step of the way. So graduated in May of 2009 with a degree in finance, which was pretty much the worst time to ever come out of school with a degree in finance. And I was able to land a job at Bloomberg in New York City. First job was literally customer service, which I'll tell you learn some phenomenal lessons and how to handle traders and salespeople in financial markets who every single one of them thinks that they're the most important person in the world. That was a very interesting experience. Then moved over to a sales role where I helped Fortune 500 companies. It was a sales role, but it was more or less consulting where I was helping them manage their FX and commodity risk. And then ultimately, after I did that for a couple of years, I worked with every company from, Home Depot to Sears to Delta Airlines with their fuel hedging program. All sorts of really interesting companies that gave me a really, really wide scope of what's going on in corporations. And then I spent about 3 years doing equity research covering media and advertising companies. It was more on macro trends and industry level research. It was a very, very interesting time because we were kind of coming across the inflection point of, watching print and out of home advertising decline as the digital era has come, to fruition effectively. So it's a little bit about my background. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Bloomberg, one of the top names in finance, different types of equity trading. You were in the heart of it in New York City. What was that like? Were you, rubbing shoulders with some of these media and advertising guys directly? A lot of integration with the stock market and everything us Californians here picture when we think of Wall Street?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, we would have some very interesting calls, and some pretty high end people in the office. Occasionally like the head of investor relations from Netflix would roll in. The guy literally looked like a rock star. Everybody else would be in like, ties and jackets, and he rolled in like a leather jacket, which was kind of rock starish of him. But a lot of my time was, spent listening to earnings calls. Looking at the news that was being released and then basically and then also macro trends that we were getting from Zenith, Optimedia, and different groups that are putting out forecasts and pretty much putting them together and then making sense of the numbers, right? So Jason, you probably know better than anybody that, in test, optimize, scale, it's really important to have the data, but then also be able to tell the story that the data has basically provided you to tell.
Absolutely. And
one other thing that I'd like to add, sorry to interrupt, would be, if earnings calls are incredibly helpful to learn what's going on within specific companies. And if the one guy who kind of has been the godfather of this is Sir Martin Sorrell. So if anybody who's listening to this podcast is looking to find out like where the market is going, WPP, the ad agency network, would be I don't know if he was the founder, but I think he's still the CEO. He would literally get on a call for, I think, well over an hour and a half. And typically these earnings calls would last an hour and half of them would be questions. And he would just literally talk about exactly what's happening in the market, what he's seeing from this massive company, And it was incredibly insightful every single time he would speak. So highly recommend that to everybody.
Yeah, looking back at my career in ad tech, the big four holding companies, we did a lot of work with agencies owned by WPP, Publicis, MediaVest, Starcom type agencies, as well as Omnicom, OMD, OMG Group, owned agencies. It gets brought up in our conversations of acquisitions after certain revenue level, even just hitting those numbers, you start getting attention from those type of entities. But yeah, glad you brought that up. And how did that differ from other verticals at Bloomberg? Like how, maybe this was just with discussions with other departments, but hearing Sir Martin Sorrell, then taking that over to a call that's discussing aviation and they're talking about Delta or anything like that. What differences did you see in the ad tech world in comparison to other verticals?
I mean, so it was more or less the metrics that we were looking at that are very, very different, so when the average person looks at a company, right, they're going to be looking at like, so for example, Facebook's going to look at net ads, right? Like the stock price is almost rendered useless, right? And the PE ratio is kind of useless. The stock is really being valued off of net ads and so forth. And so that was kind of that's kind of how these ad agency networks were being valued as well. We were really focused on organic growth. Because just like you mentioned, what these guys do is they go out and they buy. It's literally a game of buying and selling agencies to kind of financially engineer where the numbers are going to come from. And so, we were organic growth, operating margin were the two primary metrics that we were looking at. But we were also really taking a deeper dive into how programmatic was going to change the world. Right around that time. I'm looking at programmatic ads. I'm like, so think about the ad industry. I'm going to make a really crazy analogy here, but think about the ad industry as the high yield bond market in the 1980s, right? Where there was no transparency to this market and people were printing cash and everybody was making money. And, nobody really knew what a bond was priced at, right? And so all of a sudden all you had to do was report to a agency what the bond was worth. And as soon as the entire market, the buyer and the seller, had that number of what a bond was worth, the margins shrunk dramatically almost overnight because they had the transparency and, I'm not going to overpay for this bond. I know what it's worth. I know what it just sold for. So fast forward to programmatic advertising, the biggest question in the market was, are we going to see how is programmatic advertising going to impact margins, right? And I always figured that with more transparency, margins get squeezed, and so that was, and it was a much slower bleed than I was expecting, but that was generally like what we kind of saw.
Sure. And I was looking at a lot of the same things. Programmatic advertising, I was on the sales side at that time, representing a mobile tablet advertising network. They were building partnerships with print publishers, and we were selling. My team was doing product marketing and then overseeing sales, interstitials, so full screen ads on tablet devices. And we would oversell some months. That's when I was first really bridged with these relationships that said, hey, that's no longer a problem. Whatever inventory you need, billions of impressions a day across all these different ad placements, audiences, light bulbs went off for me because as a marketer, I was blown away. Like, wow, I can physically target all these people. The publishers don't matter as much. It's not a blind ad network buy as I was familiar with, where there was thousands of advertising sites and placements all bridged together, and they'd give you a sample publisher list. We could physically pick out the exact mobile in-app placements, tablet that we wanted to run. So when starting DNA, that was actually a big part of what we were doing was programmatic buys, looking at some different CPA, cost per acquisition vendors and affiliates, but would go to startups who were scaling and didn't have access to these types of technology back in 2014. I was working with this back to like 2010, 2011, and putting together tier one site lists, white lists of vertical specific sites, contextual targeting with keywords to run alongside articles of very specific topics. We would use machine learning. They would say the platforms were optimizing off millions of lines of data, of target audience data, to reach the exact user at the exact time, and all at wholesale rates. The secret of media sales and the internet is the majority of that of inventory, advertising inventory, goes unsold at the publisher direct level. So we were buying up, Forbes placements at $1 CPM, under that, where it may be $50, $100 for some ideal types of premium placements with them. And that just really opened up a lot in terms of conversion flow. So, just giving the audience the background on that, you got to see all of that firsthand. And then, of course, the shift to mobile and how that led to social advertising. We didn't really get big into social till 2015. It's our primary channel right now. And I bring it up because of the disrupt that it's, provided to the agency world, where, we'll talk to startups, let alone, Fortune 500 type organizations, and they say, we have an in-house Facebook media buyer, mm-hmm. and have a rep on top of that. I have an idea of how the support system's set up for the top organizations, the top brands that are advertising with Facebook, and the type of support that they get as well. And, it's really changed the game, looking at the AI behind that, looking at the unique data, looking at click-through rates and conversion rates in comparison to other channels. It's been an exciting 10 years for ad tech. So you got to see all that happening. You were expecting the bleed to occur even quicker. What's your perspective on it now? Or, at what points did you start seeing, theories confirmed or shifted?
So I remember pretty vividly my first experience at Adweek, where I was listening to head of agencies get up on stage and literally be fearful of saying anything negative about Facebook. It was so clear that their business was highly dependent on Facebook, that they literally didn't want to say a single negative word about it for fear of pushback on their agency from Facebook, and just completely shut them down. So it was very, very interesting to see the power that Facebook has received. I don't have to talk about, especially with your audience, your audience knows exactly how powerful Facebook is from a targeting perspective. You have millions of users that are going around and literally, clicking on things that they like, not to mention that they own, a bunch of other properties that, from Instagram to WhatsApp. What they're doing is they have the greatest data in the world. So they certainly have the ability to do some phenomenal targeting. I think that there's a couple shifts. You mentioned, the shift to digital advertising. I think that there's actually, and this is totally my conjecture, but there's a shift right now that's happening that's really interesting, where let me take a step back. I think the issue right now, for the last 30 years is, okay, we think advertising works. Or the famous quote, we know advertising works, we're just not sure which half works, right? And so I think that it shifted to, we know advertising works, we just want to be able to track it and attribute advertising to sales, right? And so that way we can start to optimize and scale campaigns. And I think that's the biggest issue with out of home and print advertising, is that there's literally no way, there's very limited ways of doing that, right? And I think that right now that there's an interesting trend where you can marry location-based digital data with out-of-home data to really provide some quality insights, but then also start to show those attribution factors that you're looking for, and so forth. So, I mean, that's one of the trends that I'm kind of looking at right now to see how that can be done. And I'll give you an example. If you walk into Ralph's right now, you're not going to be able to pick up a shopping cart that doesn't have Jesse Weinberg's space just painted on the front of every single shopping cart. And it's like, but Jesse has no idea, like, he has no call to action, right? It's just, hey, here's my branding campaign and I'm going to spend a bunch of money so everybody knows my face around the town, for better or worse. What we can now do is we can take that and we can jump into, let's use geoframes, see who's been in that shopping mart, show them those advertisements, those out-of-home advertisements, but then supplement them with that mobile campaign on Facebook or other places with specific device IDs that we know have been in that specific location. So now all of a sudden you have that, you can actually, do the branding campaign, but then also track and show attribution to where those device IDs have gone and where they're coming from. So that's one of the trends that I'm really keeping my eye on right now. And those ads, we would deliver those ads on Facebook and the platform, like, follow the eyeballs, right? And the eyeballs are certainly on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, like those are the platforms that everybody's on. So might as well go there.
Exactly. Optimizing towards that performance. And love how you said social ad placements, because that's been the big differentiator for me with programmatic to social ads, and the contrast in terms of our buys. Programmatic, the technology, that whole story of bidding every millisecond, optimizing every millisecond, going beyond human capabilities in terms of making edits, to stop using the word optimizations for a second there, but to continue to improve the performance of the ad. That technology was even referred to as AI. Facebook's has surpassed that in many ways. And then being able to add this geoframe data, which I know is a big part of your focuses today, it is really game changing. I think we've worked on campaigns together, actually, and I've discussed different initiatives that we're running where you were backdating mobile device IDs 6 months for a given location. So looking at a trade show center, or use the example of the supermarket, and I think I know what supermarket you're talking about. I see those type of real estate promotions as well. I wasn't sure if you're doing a shout out. Maybe we should tag Jesse. Not sure.
Zero shout outs. I mean, I just find it hysterical of his of how much he spent on this out of home advertising. It's like, like, why use that? So one of the things I'm working on right now, and so I'm going to shift topics just a touch, but there's, as in Los Angeles right now, and pretty much I would say the highly desirable coastline areas are seeing a huge jump in real estate. And so what we're currently working on right now is we're geoframing literally like locations that are highly desirable, and we're delivering ads to get people to consider selling their homes, right? Super high margin business. We can do tons and tons of lead generation on that stuff. But we're actually advertising, instead of, hey, buy something, hey, sell your home at the market high, because the demand is so high in LA right now. And it's the case all around the country. In specific pockets around the country, you're seeing like incredibly high. We don't have to get into the numbers, but I don't understand how real estate prices are rising when we're seeing 20% unemployment and contracting GDP, right? And like GDP is a lagging indicator, but like in the next 2 months, we're going to find out that we've been in a recession, assuming that we haven't, pumped the economy with enough money to pull us out of so the numbers don't show that, but I'd have to imagine that we're going to be in a recession, an official recession very soon. But because people aren't selling their homes, real estate's going up. So what we're doing is I'm literally going and geoframing houses on a coastline, and in desirable areas, Venice Beach, Culver City. And it's literally, hey, get a value on your home. and we're literally taking that and we're creating leads for real estate agents doing that as well. So there's really unique use cases for these things, but it's a little bit outside the box thinking, right? I mean, the one thing I'd say, and I think Jason, you know probably better than anybody, is you're not going to get above average returns thinking like an average person. And I think that's where, you know, DNA does a really good job, and I'd like to think Trax does a good job of that as well.
I love that. It's such a relevant initiative today. And, you know, going after those listings, we have some real estate industry followers. They may be contacting you after this. I know they're always looking for listing generation, but creative. And without diving too far into real estate, I actually want to change the topic a little bit. That's an expression I've heard you use a lot, out of the box thinking. I say something of good marketing requires good problem solving. Either way, there's that creative element attached to it. And when we first met, you were working on different blockchain projects. I've seen, you know, that evolve, and it was blockchain media associated with that, and some of the advertising placements. There's obviously limitations. I know you guys are working on some different CBD and cannabis projects, and you've had some endeavors in that industry. Can you talk about those experiences and how they have really, you know, conditioned you for that out of the box thinking?
Totally. So I've never, I would love to consider myself an entrepreneur through and through. And I've never been able to think like everybody else, like for better or worse, that's just the way it is. And so, you know, blockchain in itself, in my opinion, is out of the box thinking, right? Going from a, you know, a single ledger to a distributed ledger, I think is, you know, very unique in itself. But then all of a sudden you have this entire industry that's exploding, and these companies don't know how to get the word out about it. And, you know, how do you target? So it becomes, okay, what can we do in terms of creative to get them? But then how do we target these people? And that's where, you know, and not, and B2B, like the B2B side of crypto. And that's where I kind of lived for a while. It's like, okay, not how do we get involved in the ICO world per se, but, you know, how do we take these companies that are, you know, that are growing and they're trying to reach other blockchain professionals, and how do we advertise to them? And so that was kind of how, you know, TRAXOne started, was nobody's going on Facebook, or I guess some people are, but the vast majority of people aren't going on Facebook and saying like, hey, I'm super into blockchain, right? And this is something that like that I'm going to jump into from a career perspective, or any of those things. It's nobody goes on social media to talk about business, right? Or any platform for that matter. So the targeting has to be a lot more, in my opinion, like you have to get a little bit more creative of how you do your targeting. And that's how I got started in blockchain. I've really switched to more of a CBD focus recently, and not just CBD, but, you know, natural pet wellness would be probably a good way to put it. And like that type of stuff, like where we're more or less thinking about like what products are difficult to sell, that have super high quality, you know, use cases for them. I mean, I think CBD and cannabinoids and THC are a phenomenal use case for that. Unfortunately, we, you know, ad exchanges don't necessarily have that forward thinking type of view to do it. So then it becomes, how do we make these things, you know, really, how do we get by the rules of Facebook to get these ad campaigns live? And I'll give you an example of one thing that we've done recently. So we ran a campaign for a company called Dr. Fossum's Pet Care, drfossums.com if anybody wants to check it out. And, you know, the thing about CBD in general is that it works, but there's a million different companies out there. So it becomes a function of how do you differentiate yourself from other people? And so what we did and what we realized is it all comes back to education, right? And how do you educate the end user? And so what we've done that's unique, and it's a pretty unique sales funnel, is where we're actually offering a free, what called a continuing education credit on behalf of them, where Dr. Fossum is going and basically has a webinar that any veterinarian that joins the webinar can effectively get a free, any veterinarian has to have a continuing education credit to maintain their license to practice medicine. So we're offering a free education. So now veterinarians have become accustomed to learning about CBD, and now they know what product to send to their customers. So that's been a unique sales funnel for us on the Dr. Fossum side, on CBD, of how now all of a sudden we're not selling product. So now we can advertise on Facebook, and we've gone outside the box a little bit to think about, okay, what are we actually trying to do here? Yes, we're, Dr. Fossum's is certainly trying to sell product, but more importantly, before we can even think about selling product, we have to educate the users of why they would buy the product. And so that's where we started, and that's how we got to, the webinar and so forth. So that was long-winded, Jason. Sorry about that, but that was kind of the overall theme.
It's perfect. So you started in blockchain, looking at different ways to get the word out and have traffic coming through to quality opportunities as emerging verticals, cryptocurrency and blockchain related products included, often have scams or subpar types of groups involved. So, you have these great deals, these great pieces of technology, how do you make it happen? Looking for creative ways to source traffic and convert that traffic, applying that to CBD and cannabis, and looking at education as an anchor for that, with Dr. Fossum's pet care, CBD, top thought leader, influencer involved, and in a webinar, long form content platform. I mean, it's got all the right trigger words for me. I'm looking at traffic sources in a high growth, high interest vertical, such as CBD, whether you're looking at the consumer side of things or the business, and again, focusing on the growth elements of it. You then have traffic sources that are completely compliant and above water because they're pointing to education and following all the rules. And then, to touch more on the webinar, it's just a very engaging atmosphere. You have someone's full attention. They're getting credit for it. So they're logged in. The time spent metrics are probably huge. I imagine you're using some of your data abilities to get the right people there with these buys as well, and then continuing to retarget them through conversion. Sounds like a winning recipe to me.
Yeah. So two things. Number one, the one thing in crypto that always confused me was, and this is more or less just trying to reach people who are interested in the blockchain world. They would be buying ads on bitcoin.com and blockchain.net and these sites. And it's like, guys, that's not where the users are at. And if they are, they're going for a very specific purpose. And, coinmarketcap.com and, these different sites, you're literally going there for a very specific thing, and you're going and you're hopping off. You're not engaging the ad. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is in that world, you really have to identify where your audience is at before you just start buying ads of like cryptocurrency sites, right? And I think that's what, Jason, I think that you guys do a really good job of that. And I think that that's where TRAXOne really adds some value as well. It's like, look, let's focus on cryptocurrency events that have occurred, right? And do those types of things relative to be like, okay, we're just going to follow the audience because we know that if you hit bitcoin.com, you're a cryptocurrency user. I always thought that was the wrong way around it. And I think that everybody else is starting to catch up to that as well.
Yeah, it's like you said, back to programmatic. It's less about the actual publisher and more about the user. Just to blast everybody on a single site because of the title, because of the name, isn't going to be the same as finding that 1% of the audience that's actually going to click through on a strong performing campaign. The decimal of a percentage, maybe 2% of that 1% that's actually going to convert. I'd rather go after that audience all day and on any site that they go to. some of the big programmatic sites we were using in the past and still retarget on today are, weather.com and just real broad, everyday type sites. But I know I'm reaching the exact individual I want to. I can even upload a large, but an email list or mobile ID, IP address, what have you, type a data set and have ads going specifically to that group. Even more powerful, of course, on social in many regards. You want to A/B test everything, test optimize scale. But it sounds like you've been able to do that to a replicatable point of effectiveness in CBD, which is unheard of. I've been on panels at cannabis conferences, and they're saying you can't advertise on Facebook. And we'll go in and talk about our tricks, strategies to do it the right way. But that's really just step one. It sounds like you guys have been able to identify a funnel that can continue to deliver results.
Yeah, for Dr. Fossum's, they really want the veterinarians recommending the product, because now you have it's real life influencers effectively, right? So if we can basically capture those people who have a built-in audience that they're looking at them as the true authority of what they're going to purchase, that's the best thing that we could possibly do for them. So and really Dr. Fossum's is providing a service and just educating people, because otherwise they're lost. You end up buying a product that isn't a quality product, and you don't know. And I mean, you could do all the research in the world and still end up with a crappy CBD product. And that's the problem when you don't have this any sort of real regulation around it, and you let the free market kind of take over. I'd say gray market more than free market, but there has to be guidance.
Let's talk about that gray market for a second. Want to touch on marketing tactics for that vertical, but let's start it at the product. Gray market. A lot of people don't trust CBD labels, whether that's talking about, the THC CBD breakdown, whether that's talking about the ingredients as a whole, but more importantly, the effectiveness. Which product's going to work for me for this condition? I know there's terpene products that are designed to identify and be able to focus on specific conditions. How do you look at a new product? Let's say there's a brand coming out, big or small, because I've seen choice types of product from smaller companies. How does somebody even go about that in the CBD world today?
Totally. So, similar to you have to be really careful what clients you take on. Right. And I know you've seen that in the crypto space, and it's similar in the CBD space. So there's a period of due diligence that we even have to do before we even take on a customer. But if I'm just looking at, and you can really start with the product. There's certain things for me that are red flags. If somebody is making a claim, I'm just going to make the most extreme claim: a specific product cures cancer. That's something that we wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. We'd have to run away from as fast as humanly possible. If the one thing that we really look for is the product, we'll say like certified by a third party. So for example, Dr. Fossum's Pet Care is certified as National Animal Supplement Council certified. And so what that means is they've had a non-governing agency come in and actually audit their entire, business practices, production, and have basically established that this is a very real product. And, it's ready for, it basically is a stamp of approval that a big box retailer is looking for to house that product on their shelves. That piece of that piece of information that gives you that confidence that it's going to be real. So in the words of Tommy Boy, I can take a shit in a box and mark it guaranteed. But wouldn't you rather take my word for it? It's really, you have to
head up a bull's ass, but I'd rather take the butcher's word for it.
It's got to be your bull. But no, look, there's going to be a ton of product out there. So it's really important to look, take a look at the certificate of analysis behind the product. Any sort of third party like certifications that they have access to, making sure that they're not making claims, not because you care if they're making claims or not, because the claims might actually be accurate, but if they're not compliant with just website language, then they're probably not compliant in other areas, and they're looking to make a quick buck relative to companies like Dr. Folsom's that are in it for the long haul, and they're on the pet side, but making sure that the pets are getting the best care possible, and for the people on the webinar or excuse me podcast, making sure that they are putting the best things that they can possibly put in their body.
And social proof, third-party validation is
Incredible.
everything online. So being able to have the right accolades around the product, that's definitely a good thing to point out. And I'm glad we went there because, I'll see celebrities or different types of influencers associated with new brands and think that's the latest thing. Then I'll ask friends and they're, shaking their head and saying, you're overpaying for that. You're actually paying for the marketing, and it's not going to be any more effective than these other brands. And this is what you should really look at. So glad we were able to go there. And, if you were speaking, if we had someone else on the podcast with us here who was a founder of a CBD company, just given the expertise there, what would you recommend for them to test out in terms of channels? Focused on marketing at this point, can also look at it as growth overall and pivots and, different types of rollouts. So it doesn't have to be specifically media oriented, but what would your insights be that could be actionable for the audience?
Yeah. I think content marketing is probably the biggest thing that anybody could do. And it really goes back to education. So whatever, like in CBD, so you hit on a point beforehand was credibility. Dr. Folsom literally wrote the book on small animal surgery. And so, she has the credibility piece already there. So I think it starts with the strategy session to making sure that the product that the company is coming up with can have that credibility, right? What stamps of approval can we put on a specific product to make sure that product can get it to that we can actually, anybody who looks at the product can be like, this is a credible product. We know we're ingesting a product that is safe. So once you have those pieces of credibility, I really think it's how do you educate the rest of the world about those pieces, and then I think you do that through content marketing, and getting your name out any way possible. If they already have a social media following, the third way that I really believe in for CBD and blockchain as well is social nano influencer campaigns, where you're not asking Kim Kardashian to represent a CBD brand because everybody knows that she's full of shit, right? You're asking literally, I guess you could say, but so you like what you're really doing is you're saying Jason Fishman, reputable, really great guy, reputable businessman, it has now posted about a CBD product, has the following from like 200 to 1,000 Facebook friends, and you post about that product. Now, everybody who looks at that product is going to say, oh, well, if it's good enough for Jason, it's good enough for me, right? And that the end goal would be to get that firsthand endorsement from as many people as you can, and then leverage the power of social media to really get that out. So that's a nice little kind of growth hack that we do a lot. We have a full platform that that handles that kind of stuff. But that way you're not breaking any Facebook rules because you have your customers posting on your behalf. You have your content is getting out there, you're educating the user base, and hopefully you're just getting firsthand endorsement all day long, and that network is going to grow. The numbers are for everyone, it's basically you're if I post something, or if anybody posts something, to their users are now 10 times more likely to buy that product than they were before. So yeah, so you can really like boost up your results by doing something like that.
That's quite a stat there. I'm going to be circling around the team later today, and awesome recommendations there with credibility. You know, if my brother tells me to buy something, I'm probably going to buy it. If not, he's going to bother me about it until I do, just given our dynamic. But you get the idea. It's far more trusted. If you mention something of like, hey, you're doing these type of affiliates, you know, light bulb goes off. It's brought up in our meetings the next day. Where we're really in a world where we don't trust anything that we read online, anything that we see. That new movie, The Social Dilemma, you know, stating that fake news is shared 6 times more than the real story. So with all of that occurring, a good, solid testimonial goes a long way. If that is from a major, let's go back to nano, micro influencer. I believe nano's under 10,000, micro's under 100. Even if it's a few 100,000 or a few million, but with the right authenticity behind it, that's a whole another evolution from, you know, let's say a customer testimonial. And then to be able to use peer-to-peer marketing, to me, that's always been ultimate, going back to that situation of my brother or, you know, another organization that we work with, or neighbor, friend, whatever it may be. That's really what you want to stimulate. That's how I used to define content marketing, is the creation of good, engaging content that's designed for social sharing and high authority links, high authority coverage from influencers and publishers. So to be able to create that, to have a strong content marketing funnel. I think a misconception of early stage digital marketing is that, you know, you're playing a game of checkers where this ad goes out and there's a conversion the next day or that minute, when really it's more of a content marketing funnel. It's more of a strategy, not to be cliched, but a game of chess where, you know, you're playing the long game versus, you know, looking to run something and have all the results the next day. But with that consistency, we look at 7 to 17 touch points on a lot of our campaigns to produce a conversion, and playing around with different advertising message throughout that, looking at different content pieces, all produced to increase those conversion rates. Is that something similar with what you're seeing on these type of campaigns over at TRAXOne? Do you guys have like 2-week sales cycles or 7 touch points that you're looking at in some of these funnels?
Yeah, so I think it's really specific on the product at hand, right? And so and I'll give you an example, a real life example for me. You know, yeah, we're both one wheel enthusiasts, and
Yes.
I get more one wheel ads than any other. It's incredible how often I'm getting one wheel ads and video YouTube ads constantly. And you know, they have great content, and you know, obviously in their case, they feel as if that 17 touch points or possibly 150 touch points aren't enough. Since coronavirus hit, I think I get, you know, 5 to 10 one wheel ads a week. You know, and look, the founder has solved boredom, you know. That's their ad campaign. Yeah, so I mean, I really do think it's specific to you know, the product, the margin of the product, and then what the customer acquisition cost is going to be for that product, depending upon what it is. But yeah, generally speaking, I think that anywhere from 10 to 20 touch points is very, very common before we can actually get the user to actually engage in a call to action or a conversion that we're looking for.
And that's why those retargeting ads, I feel like they're following you around, are so important, because it's really that 10th, 20th touch point. Love the reference to one wheel from Future Motion. $1,800 price tag on their premium product. I think $1,000 on their entry level, and you know, it's before tax and all the other upsells that they're gonna
add on
present to you.
Yeah.
But I think the AOV, the average order value, can like you said, amplify that. 150. Hey, if it works and that acquisition cost is there, you know, why not, right? If they could spend $180 in media over the course of a few months on an individual user and watch that, you know, turn into an $1,800 purchase, that's a winning model right there. But what what happens when you see things not working? And going back to that, good marketing requires good problem solving. I feel like anyone can follow a Facebook advertising tutorial, setup guide. The self-serve platforms make that pretty straightforward. Can read all the articles in the world from marketing thought leaders on how to run a marketing campaign. I try to measure real marketing talent with what occurs when things are not working. So let's say somebody sets up a marketing funnel. They have third-party validation to give that credibility. They've activated with an influencer marketing network, or are doing something to bring on ambassadors to really get more of that sharing out there, and it's not working. Maybe it's a month in, 2 months in, so early enough, but also they're getting a little antsy. They want to see results. When the objectives are not being met, what type of advice can you share?
Sure. So I think it actually starts with the building blocks, which is making sure, and I know you guys do this and we certainly do it as well, but making sure that, the tagging and tracking is all set up and dialed in beforehand. Because saying that something isn't working is like looking at a car and being like, the car is broken. And it's like, well, what's broken in the car, right? And without actually having the building blocks of the tagging and tracking and proper, measuring tools and diagnostics effectively, that's of a vehicle, it's going to be really challenging to figure out what's broken in the car so you can fix it, right? So I think that it starts with making sure that the campaign is set up properly from a tagging and tracking and pixel perspective in the beginning. So that way we can actually go in and take a look, take a look behind the curtain and say, okay, this is possibly a creative issue. This is a messaging issue. And then really dissect it and then go back to, the name of this podcast, which is, test, optimize, scale. Making sure that we start with a good basis and then move on from there and then try a couple different other techniques from there.
By the way, you were talking about different endorsements. Let's say a group wanted to add, more validation at these stages. Do you have any tactics that you recommend, within guidelines and everything, that you would have the audience do, whether that's people they know, more of those nano type influencers, or larger? Anything that's been particularly meaningful towards your efforts?
Yeah, I mean, look, like if it's a user of the product that's now going to give you an endorsement, that's like in my opinion, that's the greatest thing that you can have, right? Because it's the most, let's just say, authentic, endorsement that anybody can get. If you're going a little bit larger, I would really pay attention to the marketing that they've currently done, or not. Marketing would be a bad word. The messaging that they've currently, used. And also, like, is the influencer, or even if they're a small influencer, are they product whores? Like, are they going out there and just, pitching any product that comes across their shell or anything that comes across their screen that they feel as if they can make a buck on? Or are they, taking a very specific approach and saying, hey, this is the product that we're willing to put our name behind? And I think that really comes through between the influencer and the end user, that like, hey, these guys, like I know that Dr. Fossum's, and we got our tagging and tracking set up, and they got an endorsement from the lone survivor, or Marcus Luttrell. And when they got an endorsement, and we're like, well, thank you for, he has 2 service dogs and he's using the product on his service dogs. And the question became like, how, how can we compensate you for your efforts? Right. And they were, the 2 brothers, Marcus and Morgan, were like, we don't want to be compensated. We just believe in your product. And, we want that to, like, we don't want to give a promo code out for the product because We want the product to come across. We want this to be authentic. We want to say, hey, we use the product, it works, and because of that, we're gonna do that. Now, obviously, we're talking about war heroes and Navy SEALs that probably hold themselves to definitely hold themselves to a higher standard than most influencers out there. And thank you for their service. But I think that it all comes back to the authenticity of the message, right? And I think that when you're choosing your ambassadors and those people that you're working for, making sure that their messaging is great. Like if the best example I can give, because I've done some research in this area, is Mike Tyson came up with a pet CBD product, right? Why? Like, if Mike Tyson came up with a product that's like, hey, we'll call it lights out, and it makes you punch somebody harder, that'd be a product that I'd be interested in, right? Because it aligns with his brand. So I think you do have to be really careful to make sure that the influencers that you're working with and the messaging that those influencers are providing is on brand. And going back to the core messaging and the core values of the whatever company it is you're working with.
Makes sense. I'll be on the lookout for the lights out product from Mike Tyson. I'm going to share with my team that not all influencers have integrity, and so much knowledge within there. The experience definitely shows. We have the whole optimization section. It's something I like to talk about because when I look at the term expert, to me, it's someone who's done things that had not succeeded in a vertical, along with successes and perhaps more notable. But I know for us, we've learned more from failed tests than from our home run. Hey, we launched this ad campaign, and within a week, it was hitting the 20x. Those are great, but the ones that maybe even that same campaign, but 6 months later when it's not working while we're scaling and we have to change some stuff up, that's where the real findings come to fruition. And it sounds like you've been able to, really analyze that all the way from your days back at Bloomberg through different entrepreneurial ventures, and then really as a consultant, analyst, guide over at TRAXOne for these different brands that you're working with. Talking to scaling a bit, do you have any stories that you could share for what you were able to scale to hit critical mass, or maybe what you're planning to on any of these campaigns? So you have influencers talking about you. You have this very data-driven targeting running on media buys that's just crushing. It's surpassing all of the performance metrics that were laid out at the beginning of the campaign at the strategy stages. Have you run into issues looking to scale? Have you seen anything that really is able to exponentially grow in an easier fashion? Or, what types of narrative can you provide around scaling?
Sure. Yeah. So we really focus on, small to medium-sized businesses, and not, major corporations where, I think that your ad spend and, we don't focus on the campaigns that could, I guess, hit critical mass, like immediately. Like, let me put it this way. If we're spending $100,000 or $200,000 a month in ad spend, we're not moving any needles when it comes to, Facebook or any influencers or anything like that. It's just not big enough. With that said, the reach that we're actually getting with that audience is significantly large enough that, that it can move, it certainly can move the needle for the company. And it's, $200,000 a month, $2.4 million ad spend. That's significant. But it's not like, it's a drop in the bucket for programmatic. I ran a campaign back in the day. We were doing like, it's like it was like $250,000 or something like that. And it was, I'll tell you how we actually, it didn't go as well as planned because it was a cryptocurrency ad buy, and the inventory that we were buying dried up with the market. So that was an example of how to not do it. But yeah, generally speaking, we haven't run into any real scaling issues where, we find out exactly what works. And then we're able to ramp up to a level which the company is comfortable ramping up to without actually reaching critical mass. And even without even seeing that the law of like diminishing returns, and if you do the same thing over and over again, so I think that's just where we're at, dealing with more small to medium sized businesses than,
Sure.
larger companies.
And that's really the game for startup to mid-market. Clients are always asking us, how do I scale? The moment they start seeing good performance, those are the questions. And we have ways to do it safer in a more consistent type of technique. But that really is the ultimate goal for a lot of these guys. It can be a drop in the bucket in comparison to their industry at times, but still very meaningful in terms of the revenue that they're receiving. Maybe that 250K ad buy is producing a few $1,000,000 in return for them. That is able to then be reinvested into operations, into various types of product development, take them to the next stages, of course, continuing to reinvest into marketing from there. So building those type of growth models, I know, is always what piques the interest in our strategies for clients. So had to ask, because I know you have a lot of winners under your belt.
Totally. Thanks. And so I think the one thing is also, you have to make sure that when you're setting up these campaigns, that you're not choosing such niche audiences. And, like, I'll go back to a real estate example. You can go out today and, knock on each door and say, hey, I'd like to assess the value of your home because I think that, the market's super strong. I think you'd be really pleased with the number that you'd get, right? And you can do that all day long, but you can't scale that. Now, if you were to do that digitally, like we're doing it now, that's very, very scalable. So I think that's obviously a very extreme example, but the end goal here is making sure that you're setting up the campaign in the beginning to make sure that, oh, this is working. Now we can actually turn on the faucet and really optimize and scale the campaigns. But I think that starts with, the beginning of the campaign, to make sure that you're setting yourself up for that ability to scale down the line. And realistically, you might actually be sacrificing a little bit of growth on the short term to make up for that and achieve a greater scale and profitability in the medium to long term.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree with that more. And very clear that you're producing value for your partners and clients over there at TRAXOne, being head of strategy, fitting into the larger Business Instincts group. A lot of great things going on over there. And of course, stemming from your background, 8 years at Bloomberg with various types of startups, blockchain groups, CBD, cannabis in between. And thanks for breaking down that funnel for Dr. Fossum's there. Thank you for being able to break that down for the audience. Big shout out around that, Dr. Fossum's. Check it out. Anything that you want to end with? Anything that you leave as a recommendation or tagline that you want to drop on the audience to conclude here?
Yeah, I didn't have anything prepared. But I guess I would say, if anybody's looking, if you know where your audience is physically located at over the last 12 months, call me, because we can really, really help you become successful, especially even during these COVID times. We work very closely with Jason with our data to help test, optimize, and scale. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I've had these type of conversations with you outside of conferences, everywhere from Atlantic City, on the boat, with your family to, chairlifts in Sun Valley, Idaho.
Yeah,
so,
man.
And actually your boat here in Marina Del Rey. So awesome to have you on. Thank you so much for being able to go into depth there. Where can the audience find you online? Do you have a preferred social channel or anything like that?
Awesome. Yeah. So my LinkedIn account is probably the best place to go. It's Sean, Sean Ford, Ford. And then also like, Sean, Sean at TRAXOne.com. It's TRAXONE.com. So anybody who, any new clients that Jason, and you're friends with who, take on an account, how it goes. Free boat ride goes with it.
You heard it here. Free boat ride. I would not pass that up. Sean, thank you so much for being on today. Again, this has been awesome. And thanks for everyone to listen today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Cheers.
Take care, guys.